My granddad actually tried to give away half-acre tracts in 1940 and didn't have any takers.
By early 1940s, it was clear that the bridge was needed because people wanted to go to the beach, and because Jacksonville was being viewed as a barrier to transportation, people in South Florida thought that Jacksonville was a bottleneck. It was causing tourists to divert over to Central and Southwest Florida away from Southeast Florida. So they wanted bridges to get people through Jacksonville quickly. So there was a recognition that we needed a bridge not only for our own development, but for statewide tourism. Well, the Matthews Bridge finally got built in the early 50s by the growth of population in Jacksonville, a population that wanted to get to the beaches, and by the recognition that Arlington was a sort of semi-rural area that could be developed.
With the Matthews Bridge came new roadways and expressways. While these expressways were positive additions to Jacksonville's transportation system as a whole, they also had a negative impact on some areas of town.
When the Jacksonville Expressway Authority was created to build the Matthews Bridge and the Fuller Warren Bridge and the connecting roadways and expressway system, one of the components of that was to create on the north side what was then called the Haines Street Expressway, now the Martin Luther King Expressway.
They really did go straight through the black communities, particularly on the north side. And so what it really did was made this huge geographic disconnect in those communities, or divide in those communities.
It took a slice out of the African American community. It relocated homes, moved churches, and separated people from their industries and stores.
And that really rapidly undermined the growth that was occurring, and you saw more decline. And that's part of why the city today is really challenged when you look at those areas.
If you look at the landscape that is the approach to the bridge, the approaches to the Matthews Bridge and the MLK Expressway, you can almost see like a clear-cut swath through what previously was part of the African American community. You can see the large concrete supports that are the approach to the Matthews Bridge are right in the heart of what was a thriving community. Many houses and streets abut right up against that infrastructure that supports the bridge and the approach to the bridge. It's quite obvious that it had to have interrupted the flow of the community, the atmosphere of a quiet community, a neighborhood. In spite of the advantages that having a bridge to connect downtown with the south side, with Arlington, I think in spite of those advantages, the impact to what it did to the neighborhoods was tremendous.
Another downside was, as the south side developed prior to desegregation, the benefits of the south side weren't available to African Americans who lived on the north side. For the middle class black community on the north side, initially they couldn't take part in the opportunities on the south side. Later, as desegregation took place during the 60s, blacks could shop at Regency and engage in other aspects, but a portion did not benefit. And that is one of the maybe sadder notes that comes out of the progress that takes place in terms of the whole bridge story.
Bridges like the Matthews Bridge helped open commercial and retail development in areas away from downtown. Competition from shopping centers and malls in the suburbs soon drew shoppers away from the city.
A major impact the Matthews Bridge had on the north side communities was that it really did undermine the small businesses, especially the black-owned businesses in the north side area.
When I first came to Jacksonville, you went downtown shopping. You went to stores like Coen Brothers or Frischkes, and you put on a hat and wore gloves and heels, if you can imagine it now, and it was a big excursion to go downtown.
While the downtown area remained until at least the 1960s, the heart of the economic life of Jacksonville, you started to see with the growth of suburbs, you also see new smaller commercial areas, like banks, for example, will start to be placed in these areas, but more important, more retail businesses will be placed in those kinds of areas.
Residents were still willing to make the drive to downtown Jacksonville for their shopping, for their activities, their movie theaters. But with this idea that you could have shopping centers and entertainment centers located in urban areas of Jacksonville, citizens realized, well, lots of free parking, ease of movement around, the casual flavor of an outlying shopping center versus downtown. And downtown, as not just Jacksonville's downtown, but downtowns throughout the nation began to die.
Over time, we will see by the by the 1980s, for example, really the tremendous decline in the downtown area, because by those times you have bridges that will be networks or transportation routes to new shopping malls like the Regency Mall that would take off after the 1960s, after the Matthews Bridge is put into place.
Eventually, much of Jacksonville, Florida particularly, your department stores were boarded up and closed. And by the mid-80s, most all retail shopping in downtown Jacksonville, Florida was gone. What had been a thriving shopping mecca only 2 decades before in the 60s was now really a boarded up ghost town.
When they built Regency, that was probably the first mega shopping center in Jacksonville. It had a lot of parking. It had Sears and Roebuck, J.C. Penney's, and all kinds of other stores that people wanted to go to. The people that usually shop downtown came to Arlington, which was evident if you tried to get in there on Christmas Eve, you couldn't get in.
I was in Jacksonville when they built Regency, and to show how little foresight I have, I thought, what in the world are they building a big shopping center out here when there's nothing around? But of course, things were being built all around, and that big shopping center, which was different in that it was enclosed and had some more upscale shops for the time, became a huge attraction, and again, decimated the downtown. So I think that Regency began that flight of the businesses to the suburbs. Before, people had been fleeing to the suburbs, but now the retail businesses are fleeing to the suburbs. And soon after that, not only the retail businesses, but the office buildings, commercial buildings. So you end up not just with stores in the Regency area, but some high-rise businesses and all kinds of things.
The impact of the Matthews Bridge extended beyond downtown Jacksonville and the immediate surrounding area.
Well, I think the other impact that the Matthews Bridge had is it helped the growth of the beaches, because it made it much easier for people to get to the beach.
And so the Jacksonville beaches, which had been relatively isolated, small communities prior to World War II, where it took a real effort to get to the beaches, now became readily accessible.
Of course, the other thing that happened is that people could come and live year-round. When the bridges weren't there, a lot of the homes in places like Atlantic Beach and Neptune Beach were summer homes. So once you get the bridges, people begin to look at to be possible to commute on a daily basis to Jacksonville, and they live at the beaches. And before that, it was a pretty long drive.
In a sense, though tourism left Jacksonville with the railroad and Henry Flagler, it began to come back at the beaches, not downtown, but the beaches, because of ready access, thanks to the highways and the bridges that had been built after the Second World War.
While years of planning and debate precede the building of bridges, things don't always turn out as planned.
The initial plan for the Hart Bridge was to link up with an expressway to the beach, which subsequently became J. Turner Butler.